Montana Territory. Autumn of 1879, the kind of cold where the sky looked like it had been scraped raw by the wind, and the ground held the silence of things buried too long. The first time Nalin showed up at the edge of the burned-out homestead, he did not say a word. He just dismounted slow, like he was afraid the earth might break under his boots. He held a coil of rope in one hand and a sack of flour in the other. He did not knock. He just stood there, looking at the woman in the doorway. Neal did not ask why the cowboy was there. She just stepped aside enough to let him in. Her hands were still shaking from 3 nights ago. She still smelled smoke in her hair, even though the fire had died down to black ash. The barn was gone. The corral, too. If it had not been for her daughter Callie screaming from the loft, they might all have gone with it. Callie was 6. She had not spoken since that night. Nalin put the flour on the table and started working without being asked. He hauled water from the well, cleared out what was left of the chicken coop, and patched the hole in the back wall of the cabin that let the wind through like a knife. He did not ask what had happened. He did not ask about her husband. He just worked until the sun went down and then left without looking back. The next morning he came again. He brought nails and a hammer, fixed the door frame, took a shot at the wolves that had been sniffing around the edge of the woods. He brought Callie a carved wooden horse, said nothing when she did not take it, and left it on the windowsill. Avon watched him from the porch, arms crossed tight across her chest. "You planning to fix the whole damn land?" she asked once. Nalin just looked at her, a little dirt on his jaw, eyes calm like water that never ran dry. "Just enough to keep it standing," he said. He came back the next day. And the next. Every day like it was something sacred. Avon started waiting for him. She did not mean to. But her hands stopped shaking when she saw his horse crest the hill. She started saving him coffee. She started brushing her hair again. She had not asked for help. She was not the kind of woman who did. But her husband had walked out 2 years ago and never came back. Left her with a child and a broken fence and no answers. The fire destroyed what little she had left. She had been ready to give up, but Nalin kept showing up, steady as breath. He did not flirt. He did not smile much. He just kept coming back. One night, she found him sitting on the porch after the sun went down, sharpening his knife. His rifle leaned against the wall. Callie had finally taken the wooden horse and was asleep inside with it clutched to her chest. "You do not say much," Avon said, folding her arms. Nalin glanced up. "Words are easy, showing up's harder." She sat beside him. The air smelled of pine and frost. "You always do this, fix things for women you barely know." "No," he said. "Just this one." She looked at him, and for the first time since her husband disappeared, she felt something warm settle under her ribs. Not wild or sudden, just steady. Like him. The next morning, before the sun had fully come up, she found him in the field fixing the fence line. His shirt was damp from sweat, breath clouding in the cold. She brought him coffee, stood there while he drank it. "You have somewhere else to be?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nowhere better." "You always this stubborn?" He looked at her, and something in his eyes softened. "Only when it matters." Avon did not reach for his hand. She did not lean in, but her shoulders loosened. And when she turned to go back inside, she left the door open behind her. That was the first time he followed her in without waiting. Callie started speaking again on the 12th day. Just one word. "Horse." She held it up to him, eyes wide. Nalin crouched beside her. "You like him?" She nodded. "He needs a name," he smiled. "Then you best give him one." Avon watched them from the kitchen, hands still in the dough. Her heart ached in a way that was not sharp anymore. Just full. That night when Nalin went to leave, she followed him to where his horse was tied. "You are not going to say it, are you?" she asked, arms folded. "Say what? That you care." He looked at her, long and quiet. Then he tied something to her porch post. A bundle of dried wildflowers wrapped in twine. "I will be back tomorrow," he said, then he rode off. He did not say he loved her. He just kept coming back, every day, like it was his religion. The maples near the creek had turned copper and gold, their leaves drifting down like slow rain. Nalin didn't ride in that morning. He walked his horse lame from a split hoof and carried a pair of rabbit traps over one shoulder, a canvas sack hanging from his belt. Avon spotted him from the garden rows, one hand tucked under her shawl, the other gripping a rusted hoe she'd inherited with the land. "You hurt?" she asked, brushing past the gate that had started leaning with the weight of the wind. "Just the horse," he said. "Stone caught him wrong near the ridge. He'll be fine after some rest." She studied his face. There was a scrape along his jaw, dried blood at the collar of his shirt. "And you didn't think that worth mentioning?" "I didn't break," he said. She turned without answering, disappeared into the shed, and came back with a tin of lard and a strip of cotton. She didn't ask permission, just reached up, took his chin in her hand, and cleaned the wound in silence. "You always this careful with folks who don't talk much?" he asked when she was done. "I'm careful with people who bleed on my land," she said. He looked at her then, not like a man watching, but like one remembering something important. "You plant winter greens yet?" he asked. "Not yet." "Ground's too hard up near the fence line." "I know a spot," he said. "Sheltered slope past the birches, soil's soft there, get sun all morning." She didn't answer right away. "You've been walking this land more than I have. Been walking it like it matters." That night she didn't wait at the porch. She waited in the kitchen, peeling turnips by lantern light. The wind had shifted east and the stove crackled warm. Callie was in the loft, curled under a quilt with her new name for the wooden horse whispered into its ear. When Nalin stepped inside, she didn't look up. "You eat today?" "Some jerky near noon." "Sit down," she said. "I made stew." He didn't argue. He pulled off his coat, laid it over the chair near the fire, and sat at the table like it was something sacred. They ate without speaking, the only sound the clink of spoons and the pop of pine logs. When the bowls were empty, Avon reached for the kettle and poured a second round of coffee. "Where'd you come from before this?" she asked. "North of Red Lodge, was working cattle near the Bighorns. Snow came early, herds scattered, I left." "Family there?" "No," he said. "Not anymore." She didn't press. Instead, she leaned back, eyes on the flickering light playing across his hands. "You always plan on passing through?" "I did." "What changed?" He didn't look at her, just folded his hands together, thumb tracking a scar along his knuckle. "Fires don't start themselves, not out here. Someone lit that barn." Avon's jaw tightened. "You think I don't know that? I think you haven't said it out loud yet." She stood, walked to the sink, and braced both hands on the edge. "Was a man came looking for Thomas last spring. Said he owed him. Said he'd be back when he ran out of patience. I told him we hadn't seen Thomas since '77. He said I was lying." Nalin stood too, slow and quiet. "He have a name?" "Didn't give one. Just a scar down the side of his neck, rode a gray with a busted ear." Nalin nodded once. "I'll keep watch tonight." "You always take responsibility for things that aren't yours?" she asked. "This is yours," he said. "That's enough for me." She watched him cross the room, lift his coat from the chair, and settle by the window, rifle across his knees. "Don't you want to sleep?" "I'll sleep when the gate's mended and that man's gone." She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. The next morning, Avon rose before the sun. Found Nalin still at the window, eyes sharp, coffee untouched on the sill. The wind had dropped. The world outside was still. "You see anything?" "Not yet, but he'll come." "You always this sure of things?" she asked. "Only when it counts." She poured him a cup of fresh coffee, set it beside him without a word, and stood at the door, watching the light stretch over the hills. Behind her, Nalin said, "When the frost sets in, I'll help you move the root cellar closer to the house." She turned, one hand resting against the doorframe. "You planning on staying through frost?" "I'm planning on staying," he said. She didn't ask for how long. He didn't offer it. But when she stepped back inside and left the door open, he followed her in. The first hard frost came overnight, silvering the fields and stiffening the soil into something that didn't yield under boot or spade. Avin woke to the sound of wood splitting behind the cabin, the steady rhythm of Nalin's axe carrying through the cold air like a heartbeat. She pulled on her coat and stepped outside, breath curling up in pale clouds. "You could have waited for daylight," she said, walking toward him. He lifted the axe once more, drove it through a log with a clean crack, then set the pieces aside. "Ground's too cold for planting. Thought I'd keep warm some other way." She crouched near the stump, touched a knot in the fresh-cut pine. "You always up before light. Can't sleep through stillness." She didn't ask what kept him awake. She just picked up a piece of firewood and carried it toward the stack under the eaves. Inside, Callie sat by the hearth with a length of yarn, trying to teach herself how to loop it into knots. Avin watched her from the doorway, then turned to Nalin, who followed her in and set the last of the wood by the stove. "I want her learning letters before the snow comes heavy," Avin said. "She's behind." "I can help," Nalin offered, brushing his hands clean. "I've taught before." Trail hands, mostly men with worse patience than children. Avin raised a brow. "They listened to you. They did when I told them they'd lose their wages if they couldn't sign for him." She laughed, soft and low. "You always this persuasive. I only ask what's needed." Later that day, they rode out past the pasture, where the slope he'd mentioned caught the sun just right. The soil turned loose under the point of her boot, warm enough to still take root vegetables if they moved quick. "You ever think about settling?" she asked, watching him as he tied down the edge of a canvas tarp over the newly dug rows. "I think about what stays solid," he said, tightening the cord. "Most things don't." She looked out over the land. "This place was never supposed to be mine alone." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. "It isn't. Not anymore." That night, when she lit the lantern, he didn't wait outside. He stepped in, removed his hat, and hung it on the hook beside hers. Callie was already asleep upstairs, and the room held the hush of something familiar, something earned. "You planning to sleep in the barn again?" she asked, folding her arms. "Wasn't sure it'd be wanted," he replied. She didn't move from where she stood. "You don't take what isn't offered. I don't leave what needs guarding either." Something in her chest pulled tight, then eased. She nodded toward the cot against the far wall. "It's warmer in here." He didn't thank her. He just stayed. By the end of the week, she found herself reaching for a second tin cup in the morning without thinking. She found herself setting aside half her biscuit at breakfast because he always ate slow and didn't mind cold food. She found herself listening for his footsteps when he went out to check the traps, waiting for the sound of them returning through the dry leaves. One afternoon, she watched him mend Callie's shoe with twine and a bit of rabbit hide. He didn't speak while he worked, and when he finished, he handed it back without asking for thanks. Callie gave him a nod, solemn and sure, and Nalin responded with a single, quiet tap of his fingers on her knee. Avin stood nearby, arms crossed. "You ever think about what comes next?" "I think about tomorrow when it's earned." "You think this is?" she asked, not looking away. "I think this is the first place that hasn't asked me to leave." She crossed to him, reached for the edge of his sleeve. Her fingers brushed the scar near his wrist, a white line, narrow and deliberate. "You keep coming back," she said. "I will," he answered. And he did. By late November, the creek ran low and sluggish, its shallow edges rimmed with ice as thin as eggshell. The wind had found its winter voice louder now, less forgiving. Nalin wired the shutters tight each evening, and Avin banked the fire with care, layering ash to hold its heat through the long dark. They lived in rhythm, not out of plan but necessity. Chores divided themselves. Without talk, he tended the horses. She cured what meat he brought back. Callie followed them both, quieter than most children, but leaning more often into Nalin's leg when he crouched to relace her boots. One morning, Avin came in from the shed with a shallow cut running across her palm. Nalin was stirring oats at the stove, sleeves rolled to the elbow. "You shouldn't be lifting that trapdoor alone," he said, reaching for a cloth. "I wasn't planning on dropping it," she muttered, holding the hand out. He wrapped the cloth firm but gentle, his thumb brushing the heel of her palm. "Does it sting? It'll heal." He didn't let go right away. "You always this hard on yourself. I don't see the point in being soft." "You don't have to be," he said. "Not with me." She looked up, surprised. Nothing in his tone was coaxing, just fact, like weather or hunger. "I wouldn't know how," she said. "Then I'll wait." Later that week, they rode out toward the western ridge, hunting for sign of elk. The sky there opened wide as a prayer, and the snow hadn't yet reached that far. Halfway between the pines and the rise, Nalin pulled his horse up and pointed to a line of tracks cutting east. Small herd, moving low, might be bedding near the hollow. Avin shaded her eyes. "That trail crosses near the old mining road." He gave a quiet nod. "You ever go that way?" "Once. Thomas took me there before Callie, said he'd heard talk of silver. Never saw a glint of it. Folks still wander through, sometimes, never stay long. They didn't find elk that day, but they did find the remains of a camp smoke blackened stones, a bent horseshoe, and a strip of canvas snagged on a thorn bush. Nalin crouched to study the tracks. One rider. Boot prints deep, heavy. He was here maybe 2 nights ago. You think it's him? Could be. Avin tightened her grip on the reins. He lights another fire on this land. I won't wait for law. You won't have to, Nalin said. I'll be between you and him. That night, after Callie had curled beneath her quilt and the coals in the stove glowed low, Avin stood at the window, arms folded. Nalin leaned against the far wall, sharpening the blade of his skinning knife with slow, even strokes. She didn't turn around. You ever think about what it costs staying? Every morning, and I've never found a cost I wasn't willing to pay. She faced him then. Even if it means having to fight for it. I don't mind fighting, he said, meeting her eyes. I mind having nothing worth it. The oil lamp flickered between them, casting long shadows across the floorboards. She crossed the room slow. When she reached him, she took the knife from his hand and set it aside on the table. You don't talk like other men, she said. I'm not here like other men. She touched the collar of his shirt just above his chest where the fabric had worn soft from wear. Then stay like this, not for the land, for me. I already am, he said. She leaned into him then, quiet and sure. No kiss, no rush. Just the weight of her forehead resting against his shoulder, and his arms wrapping around her like he'd been waiting all his life to be still. Outside, the wind pushed against the shutters. Inside, the house held. The stranger came just after the last snow fell, a wet, heavy storm that blanketed the ridge and silenced the forest for 3 days. Avin was outside hauling kindling from the lean-to when she heard the hoofbeats, slow and deliberate along the frozen trail. Nalin had gone to check the far traps before sunup, rifle slung across his back. She stood still, the basket in her hands, and waited for the rider to come into view. He wore a wool coat stained at the cuffs and rode a gray gelding with a notched ear. A long scar cut down the left side of his neck, puckered and pale against wind-burnt skin. He didn't dismount. just sat the saddle like he owned the ground beneath her feet. "You haven't Neil?" he asked, voice rough from the cold or something worse. She didn't answer. He already knew who she was. "I came asking after Thomas Neal last spring. Didn't get much hospitality then." "You won't find him here," she said, "and you won't find what you're looking for either." He leaned forward slightly. The gray stamped its hooves uneasy. "He owed me more than coin. Left things unfinished." "Then your quarrels with a ghost," she said. The man spat into the snow. "Shame when debts pass to the living." Before she could speak again, Nalin came out of the trees, rifle loose in his hands, coat dusted with pine needles. He didn't raise the weapon, just stood beside her, quiet and sure. "You've had your say," Nalin said. "Now ride out." The man's eyes flicked between them. "You his kin?" "No," Nalin said. "I'm hers." The stranger stared at them a moment longer, then turned the gray without a word and rode back the way he'd come. They watched until he disappeared behind the rise, the only sound the creak of leather and the slow crunch of hooves on melting snow. Avon let out a breath she hadn't meant to hold. Nalin didn't speak. He just laid a hand at the small of her back and guided her gently toward the house. By evening, the light had turned gold and low, stretching across the floorboards as Avon sewed a patch onto Callie's sleeve. The girl drowsed beside her, head nodding slowly. Nalin sat by the hearth, mending the strap on a saddlebag. "I never asked," she said without looking up. "Why you left the Bighorns?" "I saw a man shoot his own cousin over a whiskey debt," he said. "Watched the law walk right past it like the snow would bury it for them." She set her needle down. "You've carried a lot that wasn't yours." He nodded once. "I carried it because somebody had to." She stood, crossed the room, and knelt beside him. "You don't have to do that anymore." He looked at her then, and something in his face eased. "What are you asking?" "That you stay because you want to," she said. "Not because you think you owe me something." "I've wanted to since the first morning I saw you standing in that broken doorway," he said, "but I didn't know how to ask for it." "You don't have to ask," she said. "Just stay." He leaned his forehead to hers, their breath warm in the hush between them. No promises spoken, none needed. By early spring, the roots they planted past the birches began to stir. The ground softened, and green pushed up through last year's dead grass. Nalin built a new chicken coop with Callie handing him nails and asking questions he answered with care. Avon cleared the back field for beans, her hands no longer tight with worry. They married in the clearing behind the cabin, under a cottonwood that hadn't leafed yet, but stood tall all the same. The preacher came from the settlement 2 valleys east, arriving muddy and late but smiling. It was just them and Callie, and the wind threading through the bare branches overhead. Avon wore her mother's shawl. Nalin had shaved, though he left the nick on his chin untouched. Afterward, they shared bread and stew inside. Callie curled up beside them, her fingers wrapped around Nalin's sleeve. That night, when the fire had burned low and the snow had gone from the window panes, Avon lay with her head on Nalin's chest, listening to his heartbeat as steady as the land beneath them. "I used to think I'd never feel safe again," she whispered. "You are," he said, pressing his lips to her hair. "And you always will be." Years passed quiet and full. They built a second corral, planted apple trees that bore fruit by the 4th summer. Callie learned to ride, then to read, then to write her name in the ledger Nalin kept near the hearth. She called him Pa by the time she was 10, and he never once corrected her. They grew older with the land, not hurried, not marked by tragedy. Just days that stacked one atop the next, strong and unshaken. They worked side by side, not out of need, but because they couldn't imagine not. Love came to them not like fire, but like shelter, something they built with their own hands, piece by piece, until it stood strong against every storm. And it never left, not once.